It's been a minute since I've been in your eyes and in your ears with some answers to questions. And I thought today, since, it's a decent day and we have a few minutes together, I thought maybe we could answer some questions. So, guys, gals, non binary pals, friends, writers, makers, doers, dreamers, creatives, enthusiasts, theorists, hobbyists, beat makers, soap eaters, cake havers, barbecue enthusiasts, carpenters, professionals, unprofessionals, radicals, soon to be radicals, parents, children, workers, dancers, and most importantly, the comrades. Let's answer some questions. I'm happy to be here. Hi, I'm John. If you don't know who I am, if there's somehow is the first thing you're hearing of mine, hello, I'm me. That's not me in the thumbnail. That's just a stock photo guy. But I've got 13 questions from all corners of social media, and it would be my absolute pleasure to sit down with you right now and give you some answers to help you kind of get your head around some writing concepts, some of the ways publishing works, some of the ways we can tell stories and shape things, as well as just kind of, kick you a little bit in the tail if you need a little bit of a boost and remind you that you are, in fact, good enough to do the thing you say you want to do. Here we go. We're going to start with question number one. How do you not get tired of your own manuscript? Which is a thing I hear a lot of people saying at various times in the writing process. And I'm going to be very, very honest with you about this. The more often I hear this from people, particularly early in their writing process when they haven't really done much of anything, maybe they scribbled the first tenth of a first draft and they kind of sort of maybe sloppily made a little bit of an outline, or they wrote down some ideas for some scenes, but they haven't really sat down and gotten rigorous or gotten serious with the discipline yet somehow they keep talking about how they're just tired of writing. Those are the people who don't finish anything because they never really started anything. Now, whether or not they gave themselves a chance to do it, whether or not they really put their best foot forward and even gave a shit, I don't know. I don't know. But I do know that if you are constantly wondering how not to get tired, you are coming at this effort the wrong way. You're coming at this from completely the wrong, trajectory. This isn't a thing where you need to consider being tired. I'm not talking about it from like an ableism disability perspective. I'm not talking about managing your energy level over the course of a day like a normal human does. I mean where you are just tired of doing this thing that you say is important to you, where you are just bored by your own idea. That speaks to a framework and a philosophy around writing that you should only write when you're excited. You should only write the things that excite you. And when that excitement, that temporary short-term thing fizzles away and burns off like a firework, like a bottle rocket in the night, then you should just move to the next exciting thing. And what that tells me, no matter what, is that that person has no discipline. And this art, this production, this thing we're going to make, whether it's one book or a series or a career or a comic book or a whatever it might be, it's all about discipline. Your discipline, your self-discipline, your ability to, on the days you just don't wanna, not on the days you can't because of disability, not on the days you can't because of mental health, not because of this, that, or the other, but the straight up I could, but I don't want to mood and mindset. On those days where that discipline is lacking, where the excuses far outnumber the potential successes, those are the people who tend to swim in those waters of, I'm tired of this idea. I'm bored with it. You're missing the point. You're congesting and bottlenecking the entire discourse. And asking a question like, how do you not get tired? Illustrates to me that you're not really looking for a serious answer, because the serious answer is you put your ass in the chair and you sit down and you write. And you write because you know the greater, bigger picture of, I'm going to produce this thing and it's going to go out into the world and somebody somewhere will be, interested in it, let alone be inspired by it. That's enough. And it's going to be hard and it's going to be tough and it's going to be taxing on me. It's going to require focus. It's going to require discipline. I'm going to have to choose at times this thing, this writing, this drafting process over more fun things that are more immediately satisfying. Google marshmallow test children if you're interested in that whole idea of delayed gratification and long-term thinking and planning. And you end up in a situation where you're going to have to do the work. This is a job. It might be a fun job sometimes, but this is a job. And especially if you're talking about career prospects or the ability to earn enough income to pay off your mortgage or live entirely on the sales of your books. If that's really your goal, you want that to be the majority or entirety of your income, you don't have the luxury of sitting here sweating, oh my God, what do I do if I get tired? If we're not talking like, what do I do later when I want to put my feet up and take a nap? If we're talking about, I'm just irritated and bored by my idea, you need to change the way you're approaching this whole pursuit, because you can't do it to chase momentary, it's fun, so I do it. And then I talk about it on the internet and everybody loves me. You got to come at this like it's a job that you seriously want to pursue with every fiber in your being to the best of your ability, privilege or not, time or not. It's more a simple matter of this is important to you, so you are dedicating what energy and space you have for it versus not. It's not about being tired. You're not like if your system, if your structure isn't working, go talk to someone who can give you a better structure. Maybe it's a scheduling thing, maybe it's just an unspoken expectation thing. But if by and large you are presenting this idea of tired, I'm making air quotes, tired as though it's this big giant thing. I'm just tired. You're not going to finish your shit. You're not. You're just not. And if this is going to fuel spite in you to prove me wrong, great. I look forward to seeing your book on a shelf one day. But if this is just going to be, I disagree with you, John, down in the comments, that you're totally wrong, and then 6 weeks later, you're still telling me that you didn't move forward, well, then you kind of proved me right. This is a job. This is an effort that could entirely take the rest of your life, however long that might be, if you so chose to be an artist seriously. Take it seriously, get some discipline, follow up, and do your best because you're worth it, because you believe in yourself, not because you're just chasing the, possible financial or possible social media pluses and pats on the head. It's a job. Take it seriously. It's worth it. On we go. Question number 2. Is dialogue a wrong start for a horror novel? This is a current piece of debate in horror as a genre, but also just overall in genre fiction, whether it's romance or westerns or sci-fi or fantasy or whatever. People are really questioning whether starting with dialogue is the right, I'm making air quotes, the right thing to do. It's not about right and wrong. It's not like this approach will always lead you to failure and that approach will always lead you to success. What we have to consider is a writing concept called utility. Utility is the idea of, if I write this thing, if I write dialogue, if I write an action scene, if I write a description of the car, if I write a whatever, what does that allow me to write next? How many options does it give me? If I start with thing A, can I go to B? Can I go to C? Can I go to D? Can I go to E, or whatever it might be? Or am I limited? If I start it with dialogue, am I tying my hands? Would it be harder to go from dialogue to a sort of broad picture zoom out exposition paragraph? It can be, depending on your writing style, depending on certain things. But by and large, you're not thinking about it in terms of like dialogue to action scene and having it be confusing from a follow the story perspective. It's more about, does dialogue engage the reader effectively enough to begin a horror story, a story where we're going to grab and hold attention, or at least build tension and then manipulate that emotional kind of yo-yo, that kind of slider all the way through the story. Dialogue isn't a wrong choice. It depends, A, on what the dialogue specifically is. Like if we're having a benign conversation about, like, do you know what they call a happy meal in Belgium? Or if we're having a serious conversation about, oh my God, the monster's right behind us. it does give us a chance to set mood, set tone, create an idea of who the characters speaking the dialogue can be. But again, we want to think about utility. We want to think about, if I start it this way, if I start with this conversation, yes, it accomplishes certain things. It teaches us about character, all that. But does it make it harder to move forward where I want it to go? This is one of those cases where you want to stop and think about it. You're outlining or your note cards or how you're laying out what your next scene is rather than just making it up willy nilly on the fly. Dialogue can be very effective for setting something up, even if it's, something small like, did you hear a noise outside? Or what was that? And then leading us forward. It's totally fine. There's nothing wrong there. In fact, it could be a very effective setup if you've partnered it with other stuff, because dialogue as a potential thing can have high utility, a lot of flexibility, a lot of options. However, if we're looking at dialogue in terms of like big giant conversation, two people just sitting there, talk, 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 yap, 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 and it seems like the conversation is totally and absolutely unrelated to everything. And it turns out, in fact, that the conversation was absolutely unrelated to everything. Then, yeah, dialogue situationally can have low utility and really be a problem trying to shape and frame the story. But it is not a matter, it is not a case, I should say, of dialogue being always right and always wrong. Think about utility. Think about how we're going to go from dialogue to the next thing, whatever it is, and see if that makes a difference in how you would start and affect your story. Remember, too, you don't have to start with like full throttle on the plot and full throttle on this is the scary stuff. We're starting right away. Like, it's a novel. You can spend a few thousand, 10,000 words building everything up before the, weird giant monster leaps out of the bushes. Take your time, develop your story effectively. On we go. Question number 3. Why is there still a divide between literary and genre fiction? Oh boy, howdy. So, for as long as I've been doing this job, which is about 26 years or so, there has been this sort of look down your nose attitude from the literary position towards genre fiction. That genre fiction, westerns, fantasies, sci-fi, romance novels, all the subdivisions thereof, all those things aren't as good as, aren't as pure as, aren't as proper as literary fiction, which is something people generally struggle to define because it doesn't have a clear definition the same way it does, like a romance novel has a clear definition. We know what a romance story is, but literary fiction is thought to be highbrow with elbow patches on your jacket and somebody somewhere probably wearing tweed and, being obnoxious. Those divisions got reinforced throughout traditional publishing, where for a while, traditional publishing, long before we even got into the idea of like homebrew self-pub, but traditional publishing was thought to be the sort of elitist, erudite, not necessarily academic, but certain like educated, snobby kind of thing. Oh yes, I've read, insert philosopher here. Oh yes, I just read their thing in the New Yorker, or I just saw this, piece in whatever magazine. And it can have an elitist kind of connotation. And I think the literary fiction label still lends itself to that level of elitism and privilege and stuff. But the idea that anything that isn't literary must therefore be sneered at or derided exists because literary fiction is thought to be harder, thought to be more difficult, because it's supposed to be, again, purer, less stepped on, less of the people and more of the interest of the art of the highbrow, whereas everything else is lowbrow. I think it's a complete, bullshit argument, but this divide is perpetuated in particularly traditional publishing spaces because you're trying to bring in a certain caliber of writer as a publisher. We want to publish, this kind of thing so that we can be, we can present ourselves a particular way in our marketing, or we can advertise ourselves to a particular kind of writer. We don't want to deal with, hacky people who kind of slop their way through a very generic story. We want to deal with quality, whatever quality writers might be, in order to tell a certain kind of thing. And that divide gets perpetuated again and again as the bar of quality in genre fiction fluctuates for whatever reason, whether that's, TikTokification or not. And we've talked about TikTokification before, this idea that there's a rush to produce things for social media consumption and high speed with not necessarily a great bar for editing or quality, just to get it out and get people talking and get people moving and then quickly move on to the next thing and stay relevant in an ongoing conversation. Or if it's more a matter of we are so familiar with tropes and cliches and we're not really innovating, that we're just kind of following formula, churning out the same kind of things over and over, but with very slight and insignificant differences. You're writing a story about a cab driver versus a story about a truck driver. It's still driving, it's still transit, but at the same time it's not different enough for it to really be a thing. Those sorts of ideas, those sorts of divisions get reinforced anytime we start separating, oh, self pub has a certain, poverty to it or a scarcity of quality to it, whereas, traditional publishing is better, or you have to be more talented. Any kind of divide like that, trying to make a have versus a have not, or an us versus them, it's all erroneous. It's all pointless. But this divide gets reinforced often by white dudes. Imagine that. But this divide gets reinforced because they want to try and maintain some kind of stranglehold over the current status quo, the current position of things, the way things are now. They want to keep it because they're currently in charge or they're currently popular. And they don't want to give that up. They don't want to allow more seats at the table. So whatever they can do to perpetuate divides, create scarcity, create nervousness or anxiety amongst producers, they'll certainly do. And they, in this case, if you're wondering who the fuck I'm talking about, they are publishers and editors and agents, pimps, and writers and just doorknobs and idiots on social media who want to say that I'm better than you because they lack the ability to just be okay with themselves. So they got to knock 5 people down in order to feel good about themselves. Is there actually a divide between literary and genre fiction? From a technical level, no. Like, literary fiction covers certain things and genre fiction covers other things, but there's nothing stopping you from technically having a literary romance novel or a literary urban fantasy story. Like, it's just at that point, a stylistic decision, how you're approaching the fiction, what tools you're using, the depth at which you're writing. Those are all controllable, modular facets of writing. There isn't a divide in terms of superiority or quality. That's exactly the thing we want to avoid bringing up. On we go. Question number 4. Can I make my own style guide to give to my editor? Yes. Absolutely, you can. If you don't know what a style guide is, just so that we're clear on it, a style guide is a document that outlines things like, when I use this name, when I use this thing in my story, it should be capitalized, or the correct spelling of this, fantasy race is this, or the way magic works is, it does this and includes this and has this, or, you mention the invented company name in your romance novel. It's a style guide that talks about how my book gets written. I use this, it involves these characters. You should know these things about it when you are editing it, so that when you go look at the whole manuscript, you don't flag every instance of, Q apostrophe H, because that's a character's name. You can absolutely produce your own. This isn't limited to fantasy, though it's often easiest to describe what a style guide can be with fantasy, because most fantasy novels require some level of note taking to make sure things are set up correctly. But you can absolutely make your own style guide. Here's a list of character names. Here's a list of, cities and towns and things that happen in my romance novel. Here's all the names of all the possible suspects in my murder mystery. Here's the style and the way this thing operates in my world. A style guide is just to help somebody organize the information to give it the best presentation possible. I want it double spaced. I want it in 12-point font. I want it sans serif. I want this. I want margins over here like that. This is the spelling. This is the words that should be capitalized. Things like that. Very straightforward. Yes, you can absolutely write your own. Your editor, depending on who they are, may have to or need to produce their own in order to parse your manuscript. A publisher may ask your editor to produce their own style guide in advance of, going through the manuscript, just to make sure everybody's on the same page. You can produce your own, whether that's a freelance position and you've hired your own editor in self-publishing, or whether you are looking to do something in traditional publishing. That's totally fine. In fact, it's just to your advantage and to your credit to even have that kind of material available to help everybody figure out what's going on. Making your life easier down the road is a great habit to get into now while you're on the early steps. Make your own style guide. It takes, what, an afternoon or less? Just a list of character names, spellings, some important details, and some general statements about how your story works. A page or two. It doesn't need to be anything big, giant, and fancy. This isn't like, a 15-page backstory or a prologue or anything. Just a simple instruction manual to help somebody go through your book and make it its best self, whatever that might be. On we go. Question number 5. I'm writing my second novel. Oh, congratulations. Can I use characters from the first novel, even if it's not part of a series? The question here I probably should have had the whole question listed, but it was a full paragraph in my email. The idea being that characters from the first book didn't die. Can I put them into a second book, even if the second book is totally different than the first book? The answer is yes. They're your characters. You can use them however you want. It has, just because, Bob and Sally from down the street, who were minor characters in the first book, appear again as minor characters, or even not minor characters. They appear as major characters in a second book. It's totally fine. They're your characters. You can do whatever you like with them. You are not required or obligated to not use them just because, it's a second book, I should have a fresh start and bring in all new people. Use whatever details you want. And in using those details, whatever those details might be, it does not automatically make a significant association between second book and first book. Just because your first book was set in, I don't know, Miami, Florida, and your second book is also in Miami, Florida, does not mean you're writing the Miami series. It just means you've got 2 stories set in Miami. It's fine. The idea of a series, I think, is a point of contention, especially when you get a lot of advice from single resources like YouTube videos, or a single author who happens to write a certain way that may or may not be any good. You end up in a situation where a series becomes this thing where all the pieces are interconnected. That's what they say. That's what they go. I'm thinking of 2 YouTube videos in particular for this, where a series is just stuff that gets used over and over again, which is not true. It's not. What defines a series, just so we're clear, what defines a series is a specific and developed relationship between elements from book to book. It's a series when you involve the same main character doing, they're a detective and they're solving one murder in one book and another murder in a second book. That is a series. It's the same core concept repeated. It is a series when you have 2 characters fall in love in the first book and break up in the second book. Those are the same core elements, and you're building a story around them. It is not a series when you have 6 books set, and they all involve kids from a high school class. You could call it a series if you want, but you don't need to. It doesn't need that label. It doesn't need that attention. Sure, you could call it that. It's not going to matter. You could just have, I write stories about high school kids and romances and, my young adult series. Okay. Fine. It doesn't need to be a series. You are free to use whatever elements from the first book in your later books, even if they have nothing to do with each other overall. It's totally fine. Do what makes you happy. On we go. Question 6. What's the easiest way to get my book into a second language for publication? Okay. When I mentioned to somebody I had this as a question in this video, their first thought was, you're going to recommend software. You're going to recommend AI or something. No, I'm not. I'm not going to tell you to go invest in AI or some bro-y kind of scheme in order to get your stuff out there. Don't do that. The best way, the only way, the easiest way to get your book into another language is to pay to have it translated by somebody who actually speaks that language. Not a website, not a bot, not AI, not, some random software. Go get a native speaker of that language and pay them, because it's a job. Pay them to turn your book into whatever that other language might be. Perfect. That's all you have to do. Publishers, traditional publishers, can do this sometimes. They arrange this. It happens. It is shockingly and unfortunately not as common as it should be, in the same way that not all books are made accessible in large print or high contrast, not enough braille options, not enough, hard of hearing and low hearing audiobook options, not enough accessibility is made in those cases. But even in second languages, not enough books are distributed broadly enough for selfish capitalistic reasons. They don't want to spend the money on a translator, or they don't think there's going to be an audience in another language, so they don't bother. But the absolute easiest, best way is to get a speaker of that language to come in and translate your book. That's what you need. Who that might be, that's up to you. You can find them. They're on social media. Do some Googling. But do not rely on, I'll just dump this into an AI. I'll just dump this into, please don't dump it into Google Translate. Like, that's just ridiculous. There's no reason to do that. It won't help. It won't make a difference. Don't. I know there are a billion shortcuts, and I know they can be very tempting because people will prioritize speed or urgency. There's no reason to cut corners. Don't cut corners. Just remember how we talked about discipline way back with question number 1. Here's where the discipline comes back: to do the best you can no matter what, even if it means you don't cut corners and you don't rush. On we go. Question 7. Where in my query letter do I mention plans for a podcast? Query letter, if you don't know, is the means by which you seek representation from an agent, a pimp, to get your book out the door in traditional publishing. You don't necessarily always, if ever, want to mention to your pimp that you have plans for a podcast. Oh, we could turn this book into an audio drama. That's nice. That's really nice. It's delightful. It's wonderful. And there should be more audio dramas produced. However, in like the idea of I'm trying to get you to represent me so we can traditionally publish the text, any material that kind of takes us off on a little tangent, anything that detours us away from that, is not necessarily helpful to selling the idea of the book if you're also demonstrating like, oh, I have ideas. We could sell it to Netflix. We could sell it to Amazon. What about this? We could, make a live action thing. We could turn it into a LARP. We could have puppets. We could put it on billboards. You don't want to demonstrate that you've scattered your idea, that you've scattered your focus. That doesn't actually convey a great deal of anything other than enthusiasm and poor planning and poor impulse control, because it could be a lot of things. But this is a query letter. This is 200 to 300 words where you are trying to get a human being to, agree to take 10% of your profit in exchange for parasitically writing some emails and maybe doing a cursory sloppy level edit. Like that's what an agent does. You're trying to arrange that so that there's a middleman between you and the publisher. That's this deal. Mentioning that you could go in other directions with your thing does not help you sell the idea that this middle person should get involved. Do not, in your query letter, mention the 15 other plans you have for this book. It doesn't help. Sell just this book in just this avenue. And then later, once it goes to a publisher and you have access to more features, more money, more avenues of distribution, then bring up the plans for the podcast. Then bring up the other marketing opportunities or the other distribution channels. But get your foot in the door first, even if you're very excited, even if you're super eager, even if you think it's a great idea and it'll be as big as, insert name of big podcast here. Even then, control that. Discipline, remember, focus. Save it for once your foot's in the door, then bring it up. But if you're still trying to get your foot in the door, you don't want to just, fire all the bullets all at once and get everything all out there. You just don't need to. On we go. Question 8. How do I know if I'm writing for the right age audience? Am I writing too much for kids if my structure is too simple or too short? This is pretty common. This is pretty common from writers where there's a real sort of an immaturity to the writing. You swear you're trying to write for this age audience or this kind of reader, but your style, your structure for whatever reason, whether it's because you work with kids or you're just used to reading that kind of story, or you don't give yourself a chance to do something different, you end up writing as though the reader who could be reading your story is not the reader you're intending to read your story. And yes, the argument of, well, mature adult readers can read simple construction. That's obvious. But at the same time, the point we're kind of dancing around is you need to write for that audience. And in the same way that we talk about how you need to read within your genre, you need to read for the audience you're writing for. If you're trying to write mainstream adult contemporary women's fiction, you need to read contemporary women's fiction and see that they don't write in the same way that you would write a middle grade action story. It's a different animal. It's a different kind of thing. You can't handle it the same way. You don't treat it the same way. It might have the same beginning, middle, and end concepts. It might have first, second, and third act ideas, but it's not the same animal. The question was, how do I know if I'm doing it right? How do I know if I'm writing for the right audience? There's a really simple check for this. Go find a book that is out on the shelf, written for the audience you want to write to. Go pick up a free sample on a Kindle. Go buy the book. Go look on your bookshelf. Any book that's written for the audience, doesn't matter the genre, any book, and then go flip it open, read a few pages, see how the syntax is, see how the sentences are written, see how long the paragraphs are, how complicated the punctuation is. Go look at the text on the page, and then go look at your writing. Does it sort of match? Are you writing very short sentences and very short paragraphs and everything sounds a little too simple? Does it not? Are we grossly out of proportion here? You're looking at the Tom Clancy novel or the Stephen King horror story, and then you're looking at your book, and it seems as though you are working in three very different arenas for these three books. Look and see what people in your genre are doing. And I'm not talking like, oh, well, they're talking about evil penguins, I better have an evil penguin. I'm not talking about taking their content. I'm not talking about taking their material. I'm looking at the style. I'm talking about, how is this written? If you don't see people doing your thing your way, maybe it's worth considering that you might be trying to do something that's not supposed to be done that way. You don't always have to reinvent the wheel. It's, some people get real prickly at that idea of like, well, I'm doing it different because I want to stand out. True, I hear you, but are you standing out in a good way? If your book reads as though the most complex sentence you've got is 9 words with a comma in the sentence, whereas you're dealing with consistently more, technically sound, complicated, interlocking sentences in other books, it's not necessarily a positive thing you're doing. Chances are you're asking an editing, coaching, developing question. If you're really not sure as to who should be reading my book, you know who you want to be reading it, but how am I writing it? Go ask for help. Go have an editor look at it. Go get a writing coach to look at it. Go ask 5 other readers. Just get some opinions, get some feedback. Not on the content. This isn't about whether or not you think it's really cool to have this idea in the book, or whether or not the spaceship should have laser cannons, but more a matter of reading this. Does this read like a book an adult or whomever fill in the blank would read? If yes, great. If this seems a little young, this seems a little overly complex, it doesn't seem entirely dialed in, then do something about it. The fix for that, by the way, almost always, and I hate to tell you this, is usually a full rewrite from the beginning, starting over, just hammering back to the fundamentals and the basics of, I'm approaching the story in this direction. That's what we're going for. That's where we want to be, moving forward and putting things out. So that's the best way of knowing your audience. Look at what other people are doing and see if you're following the same sort of trajectory. Beyond that, don't immediately assume that simple is a problem. Short might be a problem, but even then, short is subjective. Simple is variable, because I can write a transcript for a 30-minute podcast that's pretty simple, but it covers a complicated topic. Don't get bogged down in generalities. Just compare what you've got to where you're trying to, what you see other people doing and where you're trying to go, and you will probably find your answer along the way. Question 9. Are all twist reveal scenes automatically spike scenes? Okay. We got technical in a hurry in this question. So let's cover some basics. A twist reveal scene is a kind of scene where you reveal a twist. It's in the name. This is generally, usually it's a discovery beat if we're going to go all the way back to our beat structure and again, hit our fundamentals. A twist reveal is a discovery beat. Sometimes it's an investigation beat because the character takes action to do this, but it's reveal that a twist exists, or it reveals what the twist is. Ah, that's really my twin sister. Oh, that's not me. I have a scar on the other side, whatever it might be. A twist reveal is a spike. Now, a spike scene is a scene that interrupts the flow of the current progression of story by radically standing out, sort of like, driving a nail into a board interrupts the flow of the wood fibers. It really stands out. Twist reveals are almost always spikes because they should ideally interrupt the flow of the previous story by presenting a change in information. However, not all spikes are twist reveals. And automatic is a word that gets us into trouble when we're trying to answer this question, because ideally, in a perfect world, definitionally, is that a word, definitionally? Ideally, yes, all twist reveals are spikes when we're dealing with perfect, presentations of each. However, a lot of the times people underserve their twists. They don't twist enough, or they twist too much and it becomes absurd and melodramatic. At that point, it's no longer an effective spike. It is still a spike in definition because it interrupts the flow of story, but it's not a great spike. It's the difference between, a very small, nail that you would use to tack a piece of board to the back of a bookcase versus the kind of deck nail you would use to build a patio. Or a railroad spike versus something something about the size of your pinky nail. It's a spike, sure, but it's not an effective one. It's mini, it's tiny, it's itty bitty. What we want to look at here is how much the twist changes the trajectory of story and how much the reveal impacts the story going forward. Finding out that, no, that's really been my twin sister, or finding out that, oh, I've been possessed by a ghost every night, should significantly stand out and should really be this tremendous big deal. Remember, the idea that we're going for can be best summarized as a big kind of dun 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 moment. That's what a twist should be. Not huge and absurd and over the top, but certainly in the sense of altering and affecting the story. It's a big deal that Vader is Luke's dad. It's a big deal that, they've been dead this whole time. It's a big deal that the kid can see dead people and he sees Bruce Willis. It's a big deal that, the village is really just on the other side of a highway. Twist revelation, the reveal of a twist, is directly proportional to the amount of tension you've built up around the difference between post-reveal and pre-reveal. If it's a really big, holy shit kind of moment, then your twist is really effective. And it is a spike in that case. I'm not crazy about the word automatic in this question. I hope I've explained twist reveals and spikes a bit better than maybe I've ever done before. I don't even know if I've really covered spike scenes. I know I've done it in one-on-one sessions with writers, but I don't know if I've ever covered it in a podcast or covered it in a video. It is, however, worth noting that twist reveals matter, and they should spike and break up the flow of story. On we go to the home stretch. Question 10. We're almost done. And now we're going to get, I guess, a little philosophical. Question 10. How can I prove to myself that I'm not a bad writer? Okay. Let's start with the verb prove. Because I know a lot of writers, I work with a lot of people who don't know, or they doubt, or they struggle to accept the quality of their writing. They don't know if they're doing it right. They don't know if it's any good. They don't know if they're making any progress. They don't know if it matters. They don't know if it works. They don't know, fill in the blank with whatever anxiety or doubt they're feeling. And they're looking for proof. Except when I hand them proof, oh, you did this really well. Look how few errors you made. You did this really well. Look how improved this draft is from the last draft. Oh, you got all this outlining done. Oh, you put together 10 pages after, taking 6 weeks off. When I point to tangible evidence that you've done a good thing, a lot of those people turn around and go, yeah, well, that's what you say. Like, I don't see it. And my question to them is always, are you really looking for proof if you're just going to turn around and doubt me? Why not give me now? I don't know if this is a matter of, well, John, you're a professional, or John, you're being paid to, work with me. So you've got an incentive to tell me something good. I don't know. But if you're just going to take the proof and go, yeah, well, whatever, I don't believe it. Is it really proof? Proving to yourself that you're not a bad writer can be an uphill battle. I know a lot of writers who aren't bad writers. They're not where they want to be, but that doesn't make them bad. When we talk about, well, what makes a bad writer? Everybody gets a little wishy-washy. Bad writing, what is it, like lots of errors? Well, it's a first draft, or it's a second draft, and that's what an editor's for. Or that's what critique and review are for, or revisions are for. Like, it doesn't have to come out of your head perfect. Nobody. I don't care what famous author you want to name throughout the entirety of history. Nobody opens their mouth or puts their fingers on the keys and immediately produces the finished book as is 100%. It just doesn't happen. Nobody sits down with a blank canvas, picks up a paintbrush, and then immediately makes the masterpiece. It takes time. It takes iterations. It takes, efforts, and changes happen. That's just the process. Nobody makes it perfect from the jump. And I don't know why so many writers need that not to be the case. I don't know why so many writers are so eager to find validating reasons to knock themselves down. Like they're just used to being told they're not any good, so they're looking for more confirmation of it. What does it mean to you, the person listening to this or watching this video? What does it mean to you when you think about yourself as a bad writer? Is it just errors? Because you can practice. You can keep writing more drafts and make fewer errors. You will never be error free. Nobody's error free. Listen to this audio. I stopped and stammered and I paused. You don't even know when I paused. And I stumbled over words and repeated myself. Like, that's not a perfect presentation. You can go through all my entire YouTube stuff, go through all my podcast stuff. It's not perfect. I make mistakes when I write. I tend to lean on certain words. That's not perfect. Nobody needs your work to be perfect in order for you to be good enough. Bad writer is a temporary thing. You might not have written chapter 1 very well. It might be a mess. You might not be satisfied with it. It might be, just a poorly written idea. You had an idea in your head and it didn't clearly make it to the page. But that doesn't make you a bad writer. Even if you consistently spent, I don't know, 10, 15, 20, 30 years writing text that did not fully translate the image or idea in your head onto the page, it doesn't make you a bad writer. It's a writer who needs more work, a writer who needs more practice, a writer who needs to maybe change their approach or change their expectation. But it doesn't make you a bad writer. As for proving it to yourself, you have to let it be possible that you're okay, that you're not wrong all the time, that you're not a failure, that you're not doomed to never succeed. You have to let that 50-50, remember, because it's 50%, it could be great, 50% it could not be, 50 good, 50 bad. You have to let that 50 good exist. There's an equal chance that it's just as good as you keep saying it's bad, because it's pretty binary. Either it is or it isn't. And you have to let that possibility exist. And I know for a lot of people who are very eager to say they suck at something, they're uncomfortable with the idea that they're, good at something, because they're so used to telling themselves that they're not good at it for whatever reason. Oh, I'll never do it that way. I'll never be like insert famous name here, or I'll never do it like this, or I'll never get there. If that's your attitude, and you're constantly looking for reasons to validate that, you will prove yourself right. And you will always find reasons to never get there. You will be the bad writer if you never give yourself permission and a chance to be better than that, to do different than that. But proof and proving it to yourself means accepting the possibility that you don't suck every single second of every single day. You just don't. It doesn't have to be like that. Give yourself a chance and let yourself be okay. Just because something has errors, just because something gets, flagged by an editor or a coach, or, somebody says they don't like a thing in a review session or a writing group, doesn't mean you're a bad writer. Perfect. And the idea of creative perfection is not evidence of being a good writer. It just means that you produce something that doesn't have a flaw in it. Oh, you didn't use a run-on sentence. You didn't have, a slightly passive verb that could have been made more effective. That's technical accuracy. That's not about good and bad, because what I think is good, like, oh, this is a good story, that's a good movie, that's a good TV show, might not be what you think is a good movie, good book, or good TV show. And the stuff that you think, oh, that thing's garbage, how can you watch that? I might be watching that for the 17th goddamn time because I love it. Thinking about things in terms of good and bad is not necessarily a really effective strategy for making progress from where you're at to your long-term goal. Because if you're so eager on some level, or so willing on some level, to always look for the negatives, look for the faults, look for the flaws, and not have that same enthusiasm or even that same potential for the positives, you're making it harder on yourself. Give yourself a chance to be better than as bad as you think you are. Give yourself a chance to not suck. Doesn't mean you're perfect. Doesn't mean you're being arrogant. It doesn't mean you're being selfish or having an ego. You're just proud of yourself. You're just allowing yourself to be satisfied. It's okay to be happy with a thing you made, even if you are not satisfied and done with it. You can be happy that, you went to the gym today. Doesn't mean you'll never go to the gym again. It's just that you worked hard today and you're quite pleased with yourself. And then later this week, you'll go back to the gym and you'll work maybe, hopefully, just as hard, or maybe not. And that's entirely up to the day. Don't always and only look for the reasons you're bad, and don't doubt the proof when it is presented to you. Give yourself a chance to succeed. Question 11. What are 3 mistakes you see writers making over and over in their first 10 pages? Let me be really clear. I love questions like this because they extend past genre. They extend past writing experience. They extend past really any kind of notion or boundary for writing. And it just comes down to what's working and what's not. And that for me is a very comfortable sweet spot. So here are some mistakes I've been seeing in the last 2 to 3 weeks, no matter the writer, no matter what story, no matter what draft. Item number 1. A lot of writers rush. They fly, they jump, they speed right through to the very, very important part because, oh, that's the cool stuff. I got to get to the cool stuff. I don't want the reader to be bored. I'm making air quotes. I don't want the reader to be bored. Okay. Listen to me very carefully. The reader just started reading. They're not bored. They're interested. If they're bored, that's on them, and they can choose to put the book down and go do something else. But also, I'd like to go back to what I answered for a previous question when we were talking about ages and writing. If you open a book up, somebody else's book, do you see them jumping right to the plot 90% of the time within the first 10 pages? Sure, events happen that will later become part of the plot, but it's not like we are always and only racing to the plot as quickly as possible, especially in the first 10 pages. So if you don't see that as common practice elsewhere, why do you think you need to do it? It's something worth considering. Rushing to the good stuff and not developing things and not taking your time. Now, sometimes, in addition to I don't want the reader to get bored, the other part of this is I don't want the story to drag. I don't want the story to be slow, whatever that might mean to the writer. The reader doesn't have a framework for slow. They just started reading. They're trying to get a handle on how you're telling them the story. And if you are racing just to tell them the big stuff without giving them a chance to know the characters who are involved in the big stuff, or you're not setting enough of a scene so they know what to picture and you're just throwing action things at them, they're not going to feel very connected to the story. They're not going to feel like the story really seems to matter because it's moving so quickly. It's hard for them to invest and care. You don't have to rush. It's 10 pages. You have more than enough time and space. It's okay if stuff happens, but it doesn't need to happen at light goddamn speed. Second mistake I see people making. They're aware of going too fast or going too slow, but they are still really scant on details. They know not to go too fast. They know not to go too slow, but they're just not developing enough of their ideas. You have a responsibility when you write to put a movie in the imagination of your reader. That's what we're trying to do when we read. We're trying to picture characters moving and saying and doing things. A movie in our heads. You have a responsibility on a sentence by sentence level to illustrate that movie. Every sentence is a camera showing us something, putting part of that movie, another couple frames, another couple seconds of film in our heads. Here's the character moving. Here's the character talking. Here's the waterfall. Picture that. Here's the giant monster attacking Tokyo. The movie comes at a sentence by sentence time. You don't have to have one sentence doing all the work. You don't have to have one sentence where just the whole thing happens. It's a summary. Oh, they're, two characters. They're in love, period. And then we just move forward. You're supposed to be developing this movie. There's no 1 second of film. There's no few moments in, the first 20 minutes where the whole thing is done and we don't have to watch the rest of it. Take your time and develop things. Every sentence is a camera. It's a great set of videos on this channel. Every sentence is a camera will allow you to slow down and frame things out. When the reader reads this sentence, what should they be picturing in their head? The character going here, saying this, doing this happening, that happening. And then go to the next sentence. Same thing. Okay, now what? And then so on and so forth. I see a lot of underdevelopment and not focusing the reader's attention, just sort of breezing through things. Stuff happens, but it happens kind of not necessarily quickly, but not with a lot of detail. Third thing I see writers doing. Now we're going to swing the pendulum the whole other way. Most people worry about, I don't want to go too fast. In the same way people worry about not going too slow, a lot of people jump to, I don't want to go too fast. I've heard you talk about, not speeding up. So then they go the opposite way. I want to make sure the reader really understands. I want to make sure the reader really sees how much I've developed. I want to make sure the reader has this scene and that scene and this and that and the other. So they go the other way. They overdo it. There's a ton of stuff happening, not just in the first 10 pages, but the first third of the book. And it just takes, 30, 40, 50 times that much, the first 35,000 words, the first 40,000 words in a 90,000 word novel, nothing really happens. We've gone too slow. You can mitigate and modulate your speed, your pace of story by working back on your outline, figuring out, okay, so here's where it starts. Then we go a few scenes and these things happen. And then here's something significant and the story picks up from there. Organizing, the reason why everybody gets on your ass about outlining is because it helps handle things like, am I going too fast or am I going too slow? And it doesn't matter what your outline looks like. Nobody gives a shit whether you're writing it with Roman numerals or you're making an Excel spreadsheet or you're just doing a numbered bullet list in a Google Doc. It doesn't matter what it looks like. What matters is that it exists and you can see the spine and skeleton of this story, one thing after the next, after the next, after the next. And when you organize it out like that, you are able to control a lot of the finer details for speed. Am I taking too long here? Am I slowing it down here too much? Figuring that out comes down to a matter of, okay, I have the following things to say because I'm writing number 4 and I have to go to number 5. So I have a certain amount of stuff to cover. Once I do that, I just move on. Okay. And then I cover 5 and I go to 6 and so on. Not outlining probably should be on this list. If you were going to ask me, like, what are some more mistakes? Not outlining, um, overdoing, like the hammering one point over and over and over again, and really making sure the reader gets, like, this character is clumsy, and you've sort of you've beaten it into the ground. It's paced, and it's flat. You don't have to hit it anymore. That kind of stuff also comes up, but mostly your issues, especially lately, have been going too fast, going too slow, or just generally underdeveloping your ideas and the story wandering all over the place. These are all fixable things. They're fixable by using outlines, they're fixable by figuring out what your scenes are and really detailing them, thinking them through, rather than sort of writing in this sort of underdisciplined fashion. Again, we're back on the discipline, but it's this idea of, sit down and structure your story, think it through. Don't just make it up as you go. Don't just count on enthusiasm to carry you forward. Really sit down and organize it. This is a craft. You are a crafts person. You are organizing your best tools to produce your best work, not right and wrong, not perfect, just the best you can do. And you drawing on a wellspring of experience from writing and reading and seeing other people's works to put things together. That's what matters, and that's how you fix it. On we go to question 12. How many beta readers do I really need if so many of them are basically telling me all the same things? I'm not sure why the beta reader quantity question comes up as frequently as it does. Because the answer is very simple. You need some number of them. 1, 2, 3. You can have more. That's totally fine. You can have as many as you want. I mean, at some point, you have to start asking whether or not you're soliciting beta readers because you're afraid to move forward. But if you're fundamentally getting all the same responses from any number of beta readers, they all stumble over the same question, or they all had the same issue, or they all thought it was great and wanted you to move forward or wanted you to keep going. Like, if you're constantly getting the same feedback, you don't have to go out and find a beta reader who disagrees with them just to say you've done some kind of weird creative due diligence. This isn't a matter of like, 4 out of 5 dentists agree, so we better find that fifth guy who doesn't agree. No. If your beta readers are basically telling you all the same things and you're satisfied with it, even if I'm not talking about whether or not they're giving you advice that you're not going to use. Oh, they want to see more story from another character's perspective, or, oh, you should add in a robot dishwasher or something. Like, I'm not talking about whether or not their advice is actionable. I'm talking about whether or not they're all sort of in agreement with whatever their feedback is. 5 people, 3 people, 2 people are telling you, yeah, this thing's in great shape. Just, put a cover on it and send it out the door. If they're all telling you a lot of the same stuff, take that as a good sign and move forward. Now, if they're all telling you the same stuff and it's negative, well, then yes, definitely go do something about it, for sure. But here's the thing to think about when we talk about beta readers. Nobody knows how many you have. You don't have to tell anybody. There's no disclosure form, and there's no guarantee that having more beta readers is automatically better. I had 4 beta readers. You had 3. My book is in better shape. It doesn't matter, because you could have had 4 beta readers who told you, that everything is fine when it isn't, or that everything is a problem when it's not. Quantity doesn't prove superiority here. It's just some number of readers. I can think of several famous authors who have a beta reader. Maybe it's a spouse, maybe it's a friend, but they just have one. And that's fine. It works for them. You don't need a whole like legion of people to constantly give you a ton of advice. Now, I advocate, if you do get beta readers and you do use them, that you organize your questions in a Google Doc so you're not just getting like specious, vapid responses. But the quantity of people you have, make that available to, the quantity of people you solicit information from, doesn't necessarily breed better story. Because if you have, let's say, I don't know, if you have a Discord server full of your beta readers, maybe they're just people you really like, so you invite them to this thing and you give them a false sense of community, and then you hand them your book, and your book is hot garbage. but you've bullied them and intimidated them into thinking that your stuff is brilliant because they're afraid to say no to you because you'll ban them or block them or shame them, then it doesn't matter if you have 60 or 6 or 2 beta readers. You're a shitty person who treats people poorly. It doesn't matter how many you have. How many do you really need? You need one, at least one, I would say. I would say 2. If you got 2, great. If you can't get 2 and you got 1, but you really like the one and they give you solid feedback, go forward and use it. But to constantly think I have to have a certain number, it's a way of chasing your tail. It's a way of stalling you out. If you're hearing all the same stuff and it's actionable and it's something you can do something with, whether it's good and it's time to move forward or whether it's negative and you know what to work on. But if you're hearing the same thing over and over, take it as a sign and just keep going. Now we're going to keep going to our last question. Question 13. How do closed groups hurt writers? All right, let's talk about what a closed group is. A closed group is any sort of space for writing, a writing community unto itself, where that closed group doesn't necessarily have any motivating factor. It doesn't matter whether the server is public and available or whether it's invitation only. That's not necessarily what I mean by closed group. I'm talking about the group that doesn't really get you doing the thing or moving in the way you want. It's a space that on its face suggests that, oh, this is a space for writers. But then once you get inside, it doesn't really seem to be that. There's not a lot of writing, or if there is a lot of writing, it's not really motivated. It's not really pushing you forward. There's not a lot of help. It's a lot of like sort of paddling in a circle or chasing your tail or just sort of complaining about stuff. It doesn't help you. It doesn't encourage you. It doesn't drive you forward. It doesn't make you a better writer. It is closed to the idea of progress. That's what a closed group is. Whereas an open group is a group that is motivating you to a goal. They are not only a resource for you to sit there and go, oh, well, hey, look, it's an example, but they are educating you. They are offering you, resources and tools that you couldn't get elsewhere. Closed groups hurt writers because they retard progress. They hold you back. They tie your hands. They sap enthusiasm. They produce and accept a lower bar of quality. If you are a writer who's trying to get better, if you are a writer who is looking to learn how to write better dialogue or write better query letters or understand what a synopsis is or figure out how to write an action scene, and you go to a particular group, you go to a particular Facebook page, you go to a particular Discord, and nobody's really helping you do those things, you mention it, maybe you don't get any responses, or you get responses and they're somewhat anecdotal and they're kind of vague. If you're not getting helped and served by a space, you don't have to stay in that space just because you're worried you won't find a different one. You can always ask for help. You can always, if you're looking for a group, if you're really looking for help and you want to learn how to technically get better at something, go leave a comment down below and I'll invite you to a community, or if you're part of the Patreon, you get access to the Discord where we talk about writing all the damn time with examples and explanations and lessons and coaching and everything. So there are spaces available that are open, that are intended entirely not just to be a space where you can, complain about this or sit around and ask how your day is and then twiddle your thumbs. You want an open group that encourages progress. You want an open group that pushes you out the door and gets you moving and gets you going and helps you feel like you're making progress. Not just, I feel better about myself, but also I'm seeing more words hit the page. I'm seeing my word count grow. I'm getting closer to my goal. I'm understanding I want a query. I want an agent. I want this. I want that. Open groups will always benefit writers. However, open groups require a level of discipline and motivation. A closed group will tolerate and accept and encourage a level of passivity. Just hang out here, just sit here, take a load off, just relax. Because the closed group doesn't care one way or the other about you moving forward or you going on. They just want you there. They want your number. They want your space. Whereas an open group is, okay, you're here, we're going to do something. It's the difference between going to the gym and watching people work out versus, climbing on the treadmill next to them. You want an open group. Be careful of closed groups because closed groups very quickly become echo chambers. Even if they offer writing conferences where they don't have any experts, or special events where everybody seems to just be hanging out and telling one person how great they are. Be careful with your closed groups. Look for open groups that teach and motivate and educate. Your goal as a writer should be to get better, to gain skills, to gain confidence, to gain experience so that you can go produce the stuff you want to produce at the level you want to produce it at, and not settle for excuses or denial or misinformation along the way. Too many closed groups I've watched this happen. I've watched people enter a group and just get suffocated by it because it doesn't meet their expectations. It doesn't give them any help. And they keep kind of waiting for some external factor to come along and all of a sudden things will change. And I hate to tell you this, it won't, because the number of things that have to align, the number of dominoes that have to fall in the right place in order for that to happen is significant, and it's not necessarily going to be that way. If you're in a writing space that isn't helping you get better, reconsider staying there because you deserve the best chance at your goal possible. And yes, a lot of that is discipline oriented, but at the same time, a lot of that is also who you put around you and what they do and what you all permit and accept from each other, how accountable you are, how motivated you are, how encouraged you are, and how grateful you are. Be careful in those spaces where it just feels like everything is heavy and leaden and negative. All right. So, 13 questions. Normally there's a live audience, but it's been a day and I'm trying to squeeze this in between all these different things. So I want to thank you so much for watching this. I want to thank you so much for being here and spending an hour with me answering some questions. If you ever have any questions and you want answers, if you're watching this on YouTube, go leave your questions down in the comments below. If you're listening to this as a podcast and you have questions, I can't hear you if you're talking just to your earbuds, but wherever you go, leave your podcast reviews, leave your questions there, or find me on social media. I'm over on Twitter at awesome_John, AWESOME, _JOHN. I should have drank more water during this whole recording. Otherwise, you can find me at johnhelpsyouwritebetter.com. There's an entire hundreds of hours of stuff right here on this YouTube channel. And if you liked this and if this was helpful and you want even more, particularly stuff that's targeted to genre fiction or getting motivated after a break or getting better at a specific genre or a better style of writing, head over to patreon.com/John Helps You Write Better. And I'll be more than happy to poke you with a stick and help you at the Patreon every week, watching new stuff, talking about new things, breaking new stories down, and giving you better tools to help you write whatever it is you want to write. And if you want me in your ears every day, just pretty much like this, though, not always for an hour, wherever you get your podcasts, go search for John Helps You Write Better, and I will give you a daily dose of writing advice and ideas. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for so much for your continued support, and I will talk to you very, very soon. See ya.